Hey there, folks. So welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we are finally going to be talking about the newest album from SZA, called Ctrl. So I'll admit, when I covered SZA's full-length debut Z 3 years ago, although it looks like it's being retroactively called an EP for branding purposes, given that I remember distinctly considering it a full-length debut as it was about 40 minutes long, a little long for an EP, but it was far from one of my best reviews. Part of the issue is that I wasn't really all that strong on it one way or the other. I mean, I really dug parts of the concept and the writing, but SZA's delivery and the oddly wonky and synth-heavy production just left me feeling kind of underwhelmed. And going back to that album now, I might appreciate it a little bit more given my greater familiarity with alternative R&B, but it doesn't mean that my issues with the fragmented and cavernous production or the guest stars that frequently eclipse SZA, not like those issues have gone away. At the end of the day, I was left feeling that SZA, she was a compelling writer, but maybe a little bit more focus and refinement in the execution that could bring things together a little better on a future project, and that seemed like it was a project that didn't seem to be coming. Again, Z came out in 2014, and while SZA has contributed guest verses here and there, the most notable, at least in the mainstream, probably coming opposite Rihanna on Anti back in 2016, although she would grace plenty of fellow TDE albums, I was initially surprised that the follow-up, it just took this long to get released. Maybe she had to deal with the fact that she's now signed to RCA, and when you factor in a major label, you immediately lengthen some of these timelines, but it also seemed like that there was more rebranding going on here. Instead of being called A, as it was initially advertised, it is being retitled to Ctrl. And hey, that's not exactly a bad thing. If she had taken the time to get the production and the execution issues worked out, I was curious how far her writing would eventually translate. So given that this is her major label full-length debut, what do we get out of Ctrl? Well, okay, it looks like it's going to be a routine for me struggling with SZA reviews, because my plan was to get this out in a few days ago so I could have more time to work with Lorde and Jason Isbell, but no, this album took up a lot more energy than I otherwise expected. Mostly because I really hoped that I would like it a fair bit more than I actually do. Because at least on the surface, this record does so much of what I like about R&B. It's got a defined and distinctive sound, it actually flatters SZA's voice this time around, and plays in tones that I otherwise really like. The guest performances are great, but not to the point of overshadowing her, and thematically, the album feels as rich as ever before. And yeah, while I definitely say this is a good project and one that I can like and appreciate and recommend, I would struggle to call this as great as I want to, or as so many critics are calling it. And here's the odd thing. With every listen, I kept having the impression I should be liking this more than I do, especially when we consider how much SZA defines and humanizes herself on this album. There were consistent questions of insecurity and self-doubt that ran through Z, sure, but Ctrl shows that balance to get SZA taking more agency in her life. Much of this album, of course, it runs through relationship drama, what seems to be a never-ending cycle of cheating, lies, arguing, jealousy, and yet I like how it's established very early that it doesn't really make a lot of sense that the guys keep coming back to her, or that when they call, SZA actually answers. And while many of the guys in this album make it abundantly clear where they're coming from Travis Scott's natural but more tastefully restrained hedonism on Love Galore to Kendrick Lamar's wry verse on Doves in the Wind, which half feels like a bet on how many times he could put the word in pussy into a verse, but also highlights both the obsession and entitlement that so many guys feel towards sex, and women particularly, and their own insecurity to get that, to Isaiah Rashad's burned out exhaustion on Pretty Little Birds, hoping that whatever truth he can deliver, that'll be enough for her. But the most interesting character here is SZA herself. Z might have painted the seeds surrounding her insecurities and potentially even depression, but the frame is significantly expanded here, as she second guesses herself far more than the shifting relationships around her, or whether she's even worthy of that sort of love in the first place. She almost seems surprised when the guy wants to come back to her after a particularly vicious argument on Love Galore, or how the guys are willing to cheat to be with her on Drew Barrymore, or the borderline clinical and transactional The Weeknd or Broken Clocks. And yet, SZA highlights that despite how some of this is unique to her situation, especially given her pretty hectic touring schedule, these are still pretty common insecurities. And while she might wish to be more normal and be more of what her partners want, the sharp sharpest punches on Normal Girl might be surrounding how normal some of these feelings actually are. They're pretty commonplace, and yet she's still willing to embrace her differences regardless. And while there's a moralistic part of me that would be inclined to highlight how reckless or even self-serving this record can feel at specific points, almost validating some of her more capricious behavior, well, for one, SZA's not glorifying any of it. She knows that she's bothered by this. And for another, if there is actual love here, that's allowed to not make a lot of sense, especially when by the end of the album, SZA manages to push against projection and find control for herself amidst the turbulence. She's ultimately doing what she wants. In other words, much of what SZA is writing about is growing towards the persona that Jhené Aiko has consistently embodied. A little bit more raw here, a little less refined and poised, but also a little bit less capricious, a little more relatable. And one thing that I really enjoyed is, just like with Sold Out, a brand of more organic R&B production with a lot of muted subtlety and plenty of guitar. And I'm not gonna mince words. While it's not perfect and can feel a little bit listless on the back half of the album, this is the sort of production that is right up my alley for this sort of R&B. From the more muted guitar balanced against the organ on Go Gina, which is even more luscious and watery on Drew Barrymore, to the stripped back strumming that anchors Supermodel and the excellent closer 20-something. It's a great organic sound that really fits SZA's voice remarkably well. Hell, there was some great tone in Organic Body that when you come to the cheaper trap rattle on Garden Say It Like That, or Broken Clocks, or Wavy Interlude, or the odd blocky blend of synth on Anything that just felt a little bit distracting, especially when you realize the staccato grooves aren't quite as striking, or that odd thin synth gurgle on Normal Girl that could have been swapped out for something more organic. I probably dig the song a lot more. You have a dichotomy between more of those lush, full sounds and stuff that just sounds a little bit more conventionally hip-hop, and that might not be the best for SZA. But really, that's nitpicking. Most of the production has great restraint and control. I love the horns filling out Pretty Little Birds, and compared to previous projects, the production isn't drowning SZA out. She is very much a presence in these mix, letting every crack and rough edge of her vocal delivery cut through. And look, I'm not denying that some of this adds some character to the more organic songs on the album, with the multi-tracking adding just enough swell that when it's needed to sound pretty heavenly, it actually sounds really beautiful at spots. But I think at the end of the day, my biggest issue with this album might be with SZA herself and some of the fundamentals that can feel a little sloppy or neglected than I would otherwise like. Part of this, yeah, it's her delivery. On the one hand, she's got a very throaty delivery on songs like Drew Barrymore or Anything that I actually really like. It's kind of distinct and unique, but there are definitely points where it feels like she's either mumbling or slurring some of her words together on purpose, be it patois or not, which can feel sloppier than she otherwise needs and a little bit inconsistent. And that's where you get to the technical elements of the writing. Beyond the subject matter, which can occasionally feel a little bare bones in some of the details, there are more than a few places where SZA just rhymes an entire phrase with itself or just piles on a lot more of the repetition than it needs, which can make more than a few of these songs feel a little thinly sketched and underwritten, or just filling up space when they don't otherwise need that. This record can drag at points. But again, that's more nitpicking. But it is enough that I'm not really inclined to like this record as much as I want. I'm pretty lukewarm on it. I do like it, but I don't love it. It's certainly good. It reflects a sound and style that's definitely a better fit for SZA going forward. But there's a part of me that still feels that she's growing into her own sound, and I'd like to see more of that progression continue. She's probably got a great album in her, but I don't think this is it just yet for me. As such, for me, it's an easy 7 out of 10. Definitely a recommendation, especially if you're into R&B's softer and yet more vulnerable side while still being pretty sexy. It might have taken us a while to get to this, but you know what? I'm happy SZA delivered. Check this out. It's worth it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know I'm late with this one. It just, the past couple days have been kind of crazy, and yeah, if you can't tell, I'm kind of sweating here. The air conditioning is dead. Again. Beyond that, if you guys want to buy the record, links in the description below, and I got the poll up there for all you guys who are fans to tell me how much more you liked it more than I did. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process, that hopefully I could cover this sooner, link to that in my Patreon is right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records to my schedule, or even movies. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.